So to introduce the panel, first of all, we have Vadim Makarenko, and he's a media correspondent with Gazeta Wyborcza in Poland, currently here in the UK, working at the Oxford Institute for the Study of Journalism, looking at the future of journalism, so he's a particularly pertinent guest. In the middle there we have Laura Kuenssberg, and she's the ITV News business correspondent, business editor in fact, sorry, and a very prolific blogger and tweeter. I think you've got something like 100,000 followers on Twitter and have tweeted something like 10,000 times and has already been teasing me because there's no hashtag for this event. So I don't know who's been tweeting here, but if you have been tweeting or care to tweet, let's say hashtag GMD is the way to go from here. And finally, Simon Rogers, who is the editor of The Guardian's Datablog, and really a pioneer in the new form of data journalism and data visualizations. I was reading with great interest their visualization of the horse meat scandal, which is well worth a look, the extraordinary links in the horse meat scandal. So Vadim, I was going to kick off with you. So you're looking at new ideas for news publishers in Oxford. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're up to there?
Right. I'm researching a project called Europa. This is a joint initiative of 6 major European newspapers. These are The Guardian in the UK, Gazeta Wyborcza in Poland, which is my newspaper, as well as Le Monde, El País, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and La Stampa. These 6 newspapers launched a supplement called Europa, which is about covering Europe from a bit different perspective, because European coverage used to be about institutions mostly. Different institutions. And we are trying to do that more from a human perspective. And we exchanging content, we commissioning stories from each other, we interviewing top local officials together. Like we can arrange an interview with our Prime Minister for all 6 newspapers engaged in the project. And then we're running this interview in the same day.
And what's the thinking behind this? This is really the idea of mutualization, sharing resources and sharing content, is that right?
Yes, this is about collaboration. News organization used to be very competitive. It's a competitive industry. But now we are a bit constrained by cost cutting in newsrooms. So we're trying to get more coverage, especially international coverage, which is being marginalized currently. It's an expensive reporting. So it's a good way to acquire new coverage, especially international coverage.
Thank you. Now, Laura, you are, as I've mentioned, huge on Twitter, but your main job, the core of your job is ITV News business correspondent, business editor. And we saw today that viewing habits remain very static, watching the box of an evening, watching TV. So how do you decide what you should be spending your time doing? Isn't your primary job being on the TV talking about business?
It is my primary job, but I think what's happened in the last 10 years is we've gone from having maybe 2 news cycles, so broadly speaking, one in the morning and one at the end of the day. So people would hear the news either when they read their newspaper in the morning or turn the radio on, and then they might hear or watch or read the news again with their evening newspaper or watching the evening news at the end of the day after work. We've moved from that, where my role would have been absolutely working just to the evening news because that was my main job, to a situation where basically news is now constant. And therefore, as a journalist, being engaged in what your audience is learning, what they're hearing during the day, what participants in stories are doing and changing their story maybe during the day or finding out new information. There is one news cycle, one giant news cycle instead of those much more regimented traditional rhythms. And therefore, I think as a very big, significant part of my job, to be part of that, you have to be in that constantly moving game. Partly because it's also where you get new information, because we talk to our audiences in a way that we just simply did not. Even a couple of years ago when Twitter was new, it was very much, for example, it was still me transmitting to people who were interested in what I was reporting on and what I was saying. Now it's also about hearing back. And that's something that's happened much more recently.
So give us a sense of the rhythm of your day. You have 2 big bulletins in the evening, sort of evening tea time news and nightly news. How many times might you tweet and blog and so on in the course of the day?
It would depend very much on the story of the day. But if there were, say there was a big meeting, a big bank meeting that I was at, particularly if they don't let a camera in, I might tweet from a meeting or some public event dozens of times maybe. I might blog 3 or 4 times, maybe even 6 times if it was an update. By contrast, on a quiet day, if not very much was moving, I might only do a couple of things. I might not blog on a particular day, or I might only tweet a couple of times. But another thing that we have started doing much more, which I think is really exciting, which opens things up, which actually, you know, brings scrutiny to journalists as well in a way that was not there a few years ago, is also linking out. So say even a story that, you know, I'm not working on, say the horse meat scandal, for example. My colleague has been doing that story really rather than me. But I know that our audience is interested in it. I know that people have been tweeting me about it. So, you know, the new big document that's got the list of all the things that have been taken off the shelves, I've got instant access to the link to it. I will tweet the link and say, here's information. If you want to go and see it, go and find it. So part of the job is becoming about signposting, curating, as well as transmitting the information that we find out, and as well as getting back information from people who want to be part of the conversation. Great.
I should mention at this point you've got to run a little bit early
yes.
to be on the news at 6:30, so that's not it's not a walkout. Yeah. So Simon, data journalism, talk us through really the creation of data journalism. You were there right at the beginning of this new form of journalism. Talk me through how The Guardian has approached data journalism and data visualization.
Well, I guess in some ways, actually, what we're doing is as old as newspapers. Newspapers have always tried to present facts, you know, and the facts behind the stories. It's just that now we've got access to so many tools anybody can use, that it just means that any journalist can take a story that has got a load of data behind it and analyse it and visualise it in ways that, you know, just wouldn't have been possible before. And it's not really about maths. You know, I'm not very good at maths. It's much more about, I suppose, being open about your sources and what Laura's saying about curating and, you know, letting people see your workings, because, you know, nobody trusts journalists, right, anymore. We're largely reviled around the world. So if you can show how you got to a story and the facts behind it, that's a really useful place to be. So what we do, I guess, I got into this because I actually went from the website in the late 90s to the paper. My first day on the paper was September the 10th, 2001. And I started working with the graphics team because they needed a journalist to work with them to kind of work out what was going on in Afghanistan or wherever. And we just started collecting all this data, and we thought, well, you know, if this data is useful for us, it's going to be useful for somebody else. We should just publish it, put it out there, and see what people do with it. So that whole relationship, as Laura says, completely changed from us being in our kind of ivory towers, handing out pronouncements to the world, to us working with our readers and trying to kind of engender a community that makes your content stronger. And so we work a lot on kind of making the data available, seeing what other people do with it, see if they do stuff better than us. So, for instance, on Friday, when that meteorite struck in Russia, we found this brilliant data set which had a list of like every recorded meteor strike in history, back to 2000 BC or something. And so there's like 50,000 points, and you can use something, a Google tool, I'm not just saying that, but we do use quite a lot, called fusion tables to map things very, very quickly. So we did that, we put it on the site. It was really, you know, people like the idea of being able to see the meteorite that hit down the end of their road, you know. But then one of our users used another tool which just looked a bit nicer to do it, and then we put that on the site instead. And it's a constant iteration, it's a constant kind of rolling process of doing stuff. And I suppose the other thing is, you know, when I was trained to be a journalist, it was very much about the words. It's all about the words. And now it's just about what is the best way to tell a story. And it might be a long piece, or it might be you can do just as much in a map or a chart, or just repeating those numbers and saying, look, this is, did you know that Britain imports X amount of horse meat? Did you know that 60,000 tonnes of horse meat gets traded in the EU every year? Most people don't know that. So you can try and bring those numbers to life and make them interesting for people.
Yeah. Now, the kind of conundrum in all of this is that the tools are very exciting. There's all kinds of new ways of doing journalism. But how do you make the business model work? And clearly, Laura, this is an area that you'll have been talking to a lot of publishers, and you know, every time you talk to a publisher, they talk about how difficult it is to make the model add up. So, can you give us a little bit of an overview of why that is not currently working?
I think the truth is that nobody knows. You have a traditional model where, say, one giant broadcaster or one giant newspaper might have used to think it would be worth them spending $2 million a year to have an office in a dangerous part of the world where they had one reporter, one photographer, and 2 security guys. Right? Bill was big, but they were the only 1 or 2 or 3 maybe organizations in that very dangerous part of the world. That dangerous part of the world has big story happens. If there are only 2 people there with a camera, the images from those 2 people are worth a hell of a lot of money because everybody in the world wants them, whether they're stills or moving pictures or whatever. Fast forward to a situation where you've got those photographers there, but you also have every single person in the crowd with one of these who can hold them up and get their own images and their own video. And also, so can the campaign groups, people involved in whatever the story is. They can immediately put their stuff online. What you immediately do, therefore, is you mean that the premium on those images and the fact that you're a big broadcaster or you're a big newspaper was spending $2 million a year to get, they lose their exclusivity, basically. They're no longer those people. It's not worth paying for them in the same way that it used to be. And in essence, that's the conundrum, and nobody knows how to answer it yet. There are all sorts of different ways that people talk about. People talk about micropayments for newspapers, or people talk about for broadcasters whether you're going to have subscription models or whatever. But I think the truth is nobody knows. Doesn't mean it's not exciting.
Maybe
but
we can just check with the audience. So when you think about the sort of the digital revolution as it affects your news organization, do you see it primarily as an exciting opportunity or as a worrying threat? So first of all, exciting opportunity, and then worrying threat. Oh, no one sees it. Oh, that's maybe both exciting opportunity and worrying threat, but it's interesting to see that there's not actually any hands up for big threat. So now in your work, Vadim, are you addressing this issue? I mean, are you trying to find new models that are sustainable in the future?
Pretty much like everybody else. I mean, this is more or less the same thing, this exciting opportunity or worrying threat. You were talking about the content side of this business. On the revenue side, it's worrying because media business is about, or used to be about, advertising. When it's coming online, there are just a handful of online powerhouses that are getting an extremely huge amount of, huge share of online advertising pie. Google itself is 40% of worldwide online advertising market. That basically means that there's not a lot of room left for other players. If we add to Google some other big companies like Facebook, this share that is left to others is getting even smaller. That's the problem with that. We are doing very different thing. I mean, things we sort of enchanted by The Guardian and what you do, your digital first strategy. So we are launching new blogs. We are doing different online campaigns. We are trying to do everything, hoping that maybe one day, someday, we just hit a gold mine. But so far, this business is looking for new sources of revenue. In Poland, we introduced not so long ago, I think it was the fall last year, a joint paywall called Piano. This is a small Slovak software company that came up with the software, and the software is being introduced by all major publishers in Poland, and it's up to them what share of their content they're putting behind the paywall and what share they're leaving for free. So it depends on the publication. Some special interest publications like Forbes Monthly, Polish edition of Forbes, they locked almost 100% of their content behind the paywall. Some general interest newspapers, they left more like 90% free. And from a reader's perspective, it's just one gate for all the participants. If you're going to Piano, you're paying once, like $6 a month, and you're getting the whole package for this $6. It's like cable television.
And is that working?
It's difficult to say. Publishers, they don't disclose any numbers or figures. To me, it's more about education of the reader. It's actually explaining the reader that content is not free anymore, or at least it shouldn't be free. Yeah. Some content requires payments.
Now, Simon, you mentioned The Guardian there as a sort of role model in all of this, but it's a double-edged sword, this, isn't it? Because the Guardian is clearly seen as one of the great innovators and pioneers and embracers of digital, but its critics would say, but it runs at a loss. So how do you square that conundrum?
I guess we've always been a bit protective because, The Guardian, for anybody who doesn't know, is owned by a trust. We don't have any shareholders. So we've always been able to operate, I guess, in this kind of slightly nice, lax space. So even though we've had job losses, they haven't been as bad as they have elsewhere, and we're all totally aware of that. And at the same time, so in the world that I work in, I work with open data. I can't imagine how open data could be put behind a paywall because we want to be part of the web. And so it's a really difficult place for us at the moment, I think, because we what we're trying to do, I guess, is just focus on the stuff we're really good at. And you can see how the centre of gravity has moved. I mean, when I joined, I wanted to work for the paper. I was brought up with the paper. And, going to work on the paper was a big deal for me. And now the paper is not the centre of what The Guardian does anymore.
Yes,
even logistically.
I remember talking to you a while back, and you said it's still exciting when your piece gets picked up and put in the paper.
Oh, it's still exciting. Absolutely. Having a byline in the paper, you never get over that as a journalist. It's still great, right? Seeing your name written down on a piece of paper, it's like a permanent thing. But you can see even geographically in the newsroom now, there's a big old news desk in the middle, which has combined web and paper operations. And the duty editing desk called the back bench, which was historically the most important desk, is to the side of that now. And basically people write, like Laura, people will be producing several versions of a piece all day, some for the website to get something up quickly, then an analysis for the site, and maybe some audio and film. So it changes how you work as a journalist. But I guess, we're lucky. We're not in a lot of our colleagues work on places where they have got shareholders and all that stuff are a lot more threatened than we are, I think.
Laura?
One very big thing, though, that in a sense, everybody who works in news always thinks that they're very, very special. And of course we are all very, very special being journalists and that all marvellous. But actually, in some sense, is you just have to do what other markets always have to do, is do something either that nobody else is doing very well at that point, or do something that nobody else is doing yet. And if you were to sit down and analyse broadcast headlines from 2012 compared to 2002, you will now hear people saying things like, we'll be assessing what this means for you, or you'll now hear, and with the latest analysis, we'll be talking to me, or something like that. You would never have heard that 10 years ago, because 10 years ago it was, here is the information, this is what has happened. And what has become a valuable commodity, if you like, is context. Because we all have all this noise and stuff and all this amazing stuff on the internet, which I love, but that's confusing, potentially, for the audience, because they've got information all around them everywhere, and soon that's going to be on your Apple Watch, or it's on a giant screen when you're walking through a train station, or it's on your phone. What we believe, very strongly, people also really have a growing thirst for, is context and analysis, and that's something that we've been trying to move into pretty aggressively, in a way that traditional mainstream broadcasters just didn't do until fairly recently.
And I totally find that with what we do, because that noise around the news stories, so when the riots hit a couple of years ago now, what the most successful thing we did was thought we just should have a list of every actual event we know has happened. If we hear about a shop being looted, we should just have that shop on a database, and that could make a map, that'd be quite useful for people. And it did nearly like 1 million pages in a day, because people were craving that kind of solid information. You had so much noise and stuff being thrown at you. Actually, sometimes you just want the facts. You just want to know what's going on in a simple way that you can understand.
But The Guardian has made great play of the idea of open journalism, that the members of the public are involved in the creation of the news. But where does that end? Isn't the logic of that eventually The Guardian disappears altogether and the journalism is done by the community?
And we have so many discussions about this, and one thing which is floating around for a while is this idea of you have trusted users. Say Wikipedia does. The people that build up trust, they earn trust, and you allow them kind of greater access to what you do. And what I find is we've done quite a few kind of crowdsourcing exercises, which is what you call a survey. It's the same thing essentially. And what we find we have to build in at the back end of that, checking through the stuff that comes in. You can't just put stuff up unmediated, because there will always be some idiot who will post pornographic pictures or whatever. So we find, so we did something recently. It was just a really simple idea something the office had about asking people what their broadband speed was supposed to be and what it actually is. You can test your speed. Really simple idea, and it did 3,000 people did this in an hour, because everybody cares about their broadband speed, right? So then we had to go through all those things that afternoon, 2 of us, and kind of remove stuff that we didn't want to appear on a map. So it creates a lot more work, but it also makes what you do stronger. So it's
If anyone wants to jump in at any time, Madam here.
Vadim, you mentioned something about that people should know that content is not free anymore, or it shouldn't be free. What sort of content shouldn't be free? And the one that's going to remain free, does it mean it's of less quality? This is one thing. And the other thing is that I work for print media, print journalism, and I'm one of those people who feel a bit threatened regarding the future of print journalism. Would you think that one day a tweet would be enough for people just to know what's going on in the world? I mean, like politics, economics, and so on?
I don't think so. I mean, will tweet be enough? Well, it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about a celebrity and about, I would say, this she's expecting and what's the sex of her child, I think one tweet would be enough, and it's more or less the case now. If we're talking about the crisis, something more complicated, social change, I don't really think that one tweet will be enough. And that's what content should be left free. Big debate. I think nobody knows, but the common sense is that news, which is being commoditized, will be free. General news, very breaking stories. Long-form journalism, analysis, commentary would be, I think, behind the paywall in future.
Laura?
That's
very quickly, isn't the point of all of this change is it's not for us to decide anymore? Yeah. And I think actually successful news organizations or content organizations, call them what you want, will be the people who are everywhere, who provide stuff for everybody to decide what they want. So if they want to just follow someone on Twitter, fine. If they want to read the whole report, here's the link for them to click. If they want to watch a longer report on the TV news that night, fine. If they don't, whatever, because it will change the way that people live their lives. People will do different things on different days. Some days you might feel like sitting and reading all of the Financial Times from beginning to end. Someday you might not feel like doing that. And I think the change we're really living through, which is why some people in the industry find it so hard and so scary in lots of ways, including me, is because it's not for us to decide anymore. We used to be the gatekeepers, and now we'll be the curators, and I think that's the change.
Gentleman at the back.
Hello, my name is Christian. I'm project manager of the first news website in Romania. It's called realitatea.net. In addition, I'm sorry I didn't catch the discussion from the beginning because I had to have a live intervention at my television in Romania. So, journalism is trending to move on the more tabloid. And on speaking about online media, we have to show more boobs, more shocking images, more shocking stories, celebrities and stuff, to have more, let's say, views, page views, and more impression for advertisers. That's how it works right now. Do you think that paid news or any method of payment from the online journalist would work in, I don't know, near future or not, making some revenues to build and keep some editors which generates those news?
Well, I think there's 2 points there, but let's take the first one first, the sort of racing down market, the sensationalism, the celebrity. Don't want to mention the Daily Mail, but the Daily Mail model is proving the most successful and the biggest news website in the world. Is that a problem, Simon?
I think it's kind of irrelevant whether there's a problem or not. It's just part of life. I think that there is still a place for kind of quality journalism, even if that quality journalism is conducted via Twitter, or because it's about trusted sources. So if a story happens now, if there's a fire in this building and it was a disaster, then I would follow it on Twitter because I would want to know, because for the people I follow on Twitter are people I trust, and if they say this link is useful, I would go and have a look at it. And I think it's increasingly about trust. The world's always been a kind of a slightly seedy place out there, and it's just that this is in your face all the time now. And I think people are clever enough. My kids are clever enough. They're very young, but they're clever enough to know to be careful online. And I think that it's just part of life. It's part of the next generation. Will just take it for granted. There's stuff out there that's not very nice, and they'll go for what appeals to them. I mean, I don't like the kind of the Daily Mail approach, the Mail line. That's pretty different to the Daily Mail. But I kind of think it's become really successful and great for them. But that's not what I want to read every day. And so, but the way I access that stuff is often via social media, is often via people I trust. And that's the great thing now, that it's all about trust and building up that kind of trusted brand.
Yeah, and you do find when you get yourself onto that page, it's very hard to get off it, isn't it? There's always something that catches your eye. But I think it leads to the further point, which is that you talk about following the fire on Twitter, but perhaps the investigation into the cause of the fire, which might be a serious piece of work that requires lots of resources and lots of time. How do journalism organisations ensure that kind of journalism can survive? Vadim, have you got thoughts on this?
Well, again, it depends. I mean, big newspapers, general interest newspapers, they are struggling to keep their investigative teams. I'll give you an example. I recently had a conversation with a good friend of mine. He's a court reporter in my newspaper. And he told me that he was working on a story and he needed some desk research. And he scanned archives of different newspapers for the story he was working on. And his discovery was basically that since 2004, almost nobody reports from courts in Poland. Like general interest newspapers. Yeah, that's right. And I told about it, John Lloyd, an FT columnist and Reuters columnist. And he told me that it's exactly the case here. It's not investigative journalism, it's just court reporting, which is a bit simpler than investigations. And it is sort of dying. So that's what's going to happen, I think, to investigative reporting if we will keep it going like this today. I mean, everybody is looking for different ways. Rasmus Nielsen, a great media scholar, a very young one, my fellow at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in Oxford, he told that our generation can enjoy an extremely abundant media diet. We're getting as much content as we want on as much across platforms we like, but it's all being funded by the generation of our fathers. They're buying newspapers, they're paying for news. And the question is, how long will it last? And nobody knows, I think.
There is some evidence, though, when you have specialist publications that actually have fantastic, and some of them, growing markets online. It's one of the contradictions in all this. And if you look at what's been successful, well, The Economist is massively successful online with a very expensive pay subscription. At least it was the last time I checked. Wall Street Journal, very successful behind a paywall. And even in the US, there's Politico, which started as a website and has actually now become a magazine because such was the demand for it.
Yes.
Or things like Congressional Quarterly, it's a $2,000 a year subscription.
Yeah. And I think if you look at things like TED Lectures, for example, if you go back to the 1960s, that sort of content would have been on TV, and you never see that sort of content on TV anymore, but it has a very lively place online.
It's worth mentioning something like ProPublica, fantastic investigative online-only unit, which is cleverly kind of, it's got a brilliant set of reporters, and they're very innovative in the way they present stuff. But what they'll do is they'll work with traditional media to surface these kind of amazing investigative stories. And there's still investigative reporters out there, and those pieces certainly, if we run a piece by Paul Lewis, it gets a lot of traffic because people look at it. And I think that there'll always be a room for it, but whether they'll always have the budgets is a whole other thing. Whether the big companies that run media groups will think it worthwhile. I mean, the stuff that's happened at CNN, which you kind of think, is this what people are going to be doing? I don't know.
Yeah. But I suppose they'll also, oh sorry, madam here. Go ahead, it's fine.
Actually, two questions. The first one, how important, don't you agree that people now are moving to read more about their local news rather than regional or international? And this is one of the solutions that was given a few years back for any newspaper to survive, is to focus more on the local news. And the other question is, how important is the verification process or the checking process or anything? For example, if I see something on the Guardian website, I would take it as true and as fact, because I know that they have done their homework. But no, honestly, I mean, or any respected media outlet like The Guardian. But I would question any other outlet if I have my own doubts or if that website has previously goofed at one point.
Yeah. Okay, 2 questions there again. So, Laura, local.
I think ever since I've done this job, there's been a debate about whether or not we should do more local or less local. It swings like a pendulum, and local papers in the UK have had a very, very hard time. Very hard time. There are a few that are still surviving, but a lot have shut largely because the classified advertising market they relied on has basically died. But even in broadcasting, that debate happens all the time. I don't think I've ever seen evidence that said if you did more local, somehow we'll all survive. I may just not have seen it, but I've never seen it. But I think that's a debate that happened even before any of these challenges were around. Secondly, on verification, I would always double check something from any source anyway. And I think it's a big generational thing, though. As a citizen rather than a journalist, I think we have to work very hard that people who are coming through know that what they read online has to be taken with a pinch of salt, unless it is branded from something that they really, really trust, you know, whether it's my organisation or the BBC or one of the big papers. And I think it's verification for journalists is as important as it has ever been. My concern is that we make sure the younger generation and those to follow is aware of that too, and we teach them that.
Simon?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you know, in my area, data actually offers a lot of opportunities to local reporting, because suddenly you can compare where you live to somewhere else. And there's Wales Today has a really great data journalist who works for them, who's always, you know, showing how that bit of one bit of community compares to another around the news, and that's a kind of solution that could work out for people. Who knows? But certainly, I know the stuff that we do that does really well is often the stuff that allows you to compare where you live to somewhere else, so you can see how you compare to somebody else. On the verification thing, I think, certainly from our point of view, you know, the Guardian makes mistakes all the time with with the Grawny ads, but people know it because we have a reads editor, we publish corrections, clarifications, and I think being transparent like that, because everybody's human, right? Sometimes a mistake will creep in, but you have to be open about it, not try and hide it, and try and be trustworthy. I mean, I'm paranoid about mistakes in data because it's so easy to get things wrong. Government data is published in an awful state in this country, and almost as if they're kind of daring you to get things wrong with it. So it's up to you as a journalist to make sure you're right all the time. I'm absolutely paranoid about it. But that's why we try and involve the community and get them to help us and say, is this right? Can this be right? Because often you look at a story, a data story, and it looks amazing. And the reason it looks amazing is it's not right. And so you have to use that kind of second sense of thinking, could this be right? And engage the community, because out there will be the experts in that area who will say, well, actually, I don't think that data's right because of this. And then you can involve them in the story.
Vadim, how do you face this problem that English is obviously read by millions and millions of people around the world, but not that many people outside Poland or outside the Polish diaspora speak Polish or are interested in reading Polish content? How do you deal with that problem?
Oh, well, that's what I was about to say. When we are talking about successful publications online, like The Economist or Financial Times or The Wall Street Journal, these are big worldwide publications, in fact, with huge international market. In Poland, we don't have such market. I mean, we have just Poland and diaspora, which is not really big. At least not to an extent to maintain such a business online. So we're counting our audience in a bit more, I would say, limited way. And I was surprised actually because I was doing interviews with different editors in different newspapers for my research paper. And when I was talking to The Guardian, the guy told me that basically it's an interesting project for them because they can attract some traffic from Australia and the US on project which is basically, I remind you about European Union. We can't think like that. We can only think about our local readers, and it narrows our perspective significantly. So this profitability issue is a big issue for us.
Gentleman over here.
From what Eric Schmidt started guessing out years before, regarding the French model that you've started financing the French press with 60 million euros for their projects. The first question would be, why would Google finance the press? Because articles are everywhere. But as I said, Eric Schmidt learned that your ads must go in the same time with relevant articles, with the good kind of press. And my question would be, is this financing of 60 million euros the first step from a strategy that Google wants to insist on in the next years, of financing press to have relevant articles, to join your ads, your way of making money from the internet? And I understand that bloggers or other media organizations have appeared in the last years, but they are not enough to produce this relevant content that you insist on. So to my question, if this is the first step of financing, sure, I would add, is this the only solution? Is it moral to finance the press? And will EU, the European Union, maybe follow your model to actually accept that the press can work in the next decades through this kind of financing from the authorities? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. The first point to make here is that this is not a question of financing the press, and it is working in commercial partnership with the press, and that's something that we've been very, very keen to do over a number of years, to have strong commercial partnerships with the newspaper industry. But we've seen the suggestion in various countries, in France and in Germany and other countries, that Google should be paying for the links of newspaper organizations, and that's a route that we've always said we can't go down. And if you look at the French case, it's a commercial partnership aimed indeed at creating high quality content, but it's not financing the news industry, and it's not paying, crucially, it's not paying for links.
So one thing I think is quite interesting about this, you know, if you were starting today, you would never invent newspapers. They're so expensive. You have to print them. We print 4 editions, so we have a staff that starts in the morning, and we've got the website staff, but you know, just the people working on paper, start in the morning, go through to 2 in the morning. So you're always getting news that's out of date. It has to be driven across the country from, to John O'Groats or wherever, the other end of the country. A fleet of lorries also deliver other newspapers. If you're late getting to print, you can face a bill of £100,000 for being half an hour late. It's incredibly expensive. Ink is expensive, paper's expensive. It's not a sustainable medium.
That's the next logical question, isn't it? I mean, you wouldn't start from here. So how long does print have, would you say? I mean, if you're talking about investing in investigative journalism or high-quality journalism, the logical thing might be to get out of the print game and save the money on paper and distribution and so on, and distribute solely online. Do you think we're going to see that coming up?
The other side of this whole thing, of course, for us is actually we make more money out of the newspaper than the website. But newspaper money going down, website money going up. So how long will this play out, do you think? I mean, if we look 5, 10, 20 years ahead, will we still see the same kind of landscape with print products, or is that going to change?
I think it will be much changed. What it will look like, I'm not sure. There will, I think, particularly in this country, which is so centralised, where the debate, for want of a better word, with those big newspapers that still drive the debate, there will still be appetite, quite how, I think the scale of appetite will be much smaller. On the flip side, we still have about 4 million people buying a tabloid paper every day. It's still a big part of our habit, but it will be much transformed. But I would not be, I mean, I certainly wouldn't be the first person or the last person to predict that some of the titles will go.
Vadim, you've got to run. Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.
Sorry. Well, if anyone wants to take Laura's place up here, please be my guest. You go on.
I think embracing online too fast and getting rid of paper edition would be unreasonable, because it's still, as you told, it's substantial revenue for publisher and reporters and all of people working in the industry. The case of Mail Online, which you were talking about, this is £690 million, I believe, a year in revenue. And Mail Online itself produces about £30 million a year in revenue. It's
Yeah. So there's
Very simple math.
Yeah.
This is weird.
There's
thing,
life
isn't
in
it, where
newspapers. Yeah.
You get influence from newspapers with very few readers.
Yeah.
You know, 450,000 or whatever. Perhaps online we've got millions of readers. Maybe the first, or second quality read one-line site. But that doesn't bring the same kind of revenue with it yet. Yeah. They will do, I guess, in the long run, and that's what we're thinking. But who knows?
Okay. More questions, Madam.
Is online ever likely to bring in that sort of level of revenue? Because you're dealing with a generation that thinks the online world is free. I mean, I'm a journalist. I work for a newspaper, but I haven't paid for anything online since I went online at the age of 9. So I refuse it. I know my way around enough. I've never paid for a song. I don't pay for films. I don't pay for my FT, the Times, Wall Street subscription. So I mean, you're dealing with that sort of generation. Yeah. Can you win in any way?
Maybe it's just less overt. That weirdly, Datablog is probably actually makes money because we get quite a lot of people want to sponsor bits of the sites or sponsor competitions and stuff. But I think if we went behind a paywall, I don't think people pay for our content because it's out there already. So and will my children want to pay for news content? I'm not sure they will. So,
and if you pick up on a lot of the things that you've been talking about here today, I mean, our aim as Google is to work with the publishers to try to create an environment where people are staying on pages for longer. So if you can engage the readers on pages, and that could be with YouTube or with Maps or with Hangouts, if you can keep them there for longer, then the advertising becomes more effective and you get a virtuous circle, that the revenues are greater and that feeds back into the journalism. So I think there are clearly two ways that news publishers can go, whether it's the paywall model or trying to engage the readers for longer. But there's constantly new ways of finding more effective advertising and more effective engagement for readers.
But it's all about the advertising, isn't it? Yeah, even for Google, it's all about the advertising.
No, sure, it's all about the advertising, and the ways of doing advertising are getting better. I mean, you saw that idea of skippable ads. It's good for the advertiser in the sense that they only pay when somebody stays to watch the ad for a longer period, but it doesn't annoy the viewer. That they get very used to skippable ads, and that isn't an inconvenience. More questions. We're getting quite close to the end. Madam here.
And you can generalize the American experience or the British experience in media to other parts of the world. To what extent you can say, okay, this is the British example and this is what's going to happen in Sri Lanka or Bangladesh after 10, 15 years from now? Can you?
I don't think so. I mean, British market is very special with huge press tradition. American market is big one. It's a big market, which means a niche project can bring quite a lot of money to maintain it. When it comes to Poland, to my country, it's 38 million, quite big. It's 6th largest country in the EU. But niche project there is less than 1 million people, definitely. And you can't, it's not easy in a business sense to conduct such a project for a long time. You have to make a profit at the end of the day. And if nobody pays online, you just can't do that.
My sense is the people that will succeed will be the people that recognise their local market. So for us now, we get maybe 1/3 of our traffic comes from the States on some things, and some Datablog posts get 90% of the traffic from America or from Australia or Canada or whatever. So, it's easy for us in a way that, for a published publication, it wouldn't be, but my sense is that people do really well know their market and focus on that and do it well, and that's.
But yet we have seen some examples in the American market. Christian Science Monitor, they canceled the whole print edition and they went online. Yeah. There is no Christian Science Monitor newspaper in print anymore.
Well, Texas Tribune is worth looking at. I think Texas Tribune is really interesting because it's a not-for-profit organisation. And they have a really good data journalism kind of side to them. They get 60% of their traffic from data pages.
Well, it's not about only newspapers. If you take a look at a digital channels economy, it's totally different in the US. Yeah. They have much larger audiences than in smaller countries. So, successful digital channel in American market is actually a very big enterprise, if we're comparing it from the Polish point of view.
But you seem to be suggesting that the sustainable future may lie in paywalls or some form of paywalls. And Simon, you're suggesting the opposite. It's advertising that's the future. Is that right?
Well, only because
because actually, The
pretending
Guardian, your digital director, she once said, paywall over my dead body.
Yeah, I'd be astounded if we charged The Guardian. I'd just be amazed, because I think that takes you out of the web. The Times is not part of the web and the internet now in the UK, and it was a major player before the paywall. And so maybe they'll make enough money out of it, maybe they won't. And I don't know, but I think my feeling, and I wouldn't want to work for a publication that went totally behind a paywall, because I think I want to be part of the web. I want to be able to take advantage of the community, because I think you get better content that way.
Vadim?
That's a difficult question. We're a general interest newspaper, which means we're driven by advertising to a large extent. Decision whether to implement the paywall or not.
And you're discussing that at Gazeta at the moment, are you?
Yeah, we are discussing all the time, but the paywall we introduced is flexible, as I told. So we can move all the time contents sort of behind and back the paywall, right? So I think we put behind more or less long-form journalism first, analysis second, and I think some pictures, but I don't remember exactly, is it still the case?
And do you worry about that point about disappearing from the web, about disappearing behind the wall?
Well, it's nice when everybody can find your story online. But on the other hand, you like this feeling that somebody actually pays for it. So it's two different things, and you have to seek balance all the time. We don't have such a huge international market as our colleagues in the UK or US. So we want to believe that paywalls, at least to some extent, is a future.
Okay. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Gentleman here.
I'm from Sweden, just to get another bit of a smaller market then. If you look at Sweden, we have a 90% broadband penetration. And the main internet supplier of news is Aftonbladet, who is a tabloid. Now they earn more money of their digital online edition than from the paper. They are addressing that there will not be a paper in 5 years, or maybe there will be an online company printing a paper, but that will not be the main source of income. And what they did was, of course, drive journalistic items that advertisers like to be around. Now they start a big television station as well, online, and they have services around the newspaper that drives traffic. And I'm wondering if we not embrace that and take a position in that area of having services around the journalistic content, I don't think we can protect it. We can't protect and the paywalls, of course, but you can always steal something behind the paywall anyway. So I'm wondering if for Poland, for instance, why don't you just embrace the market and do stuff around the journalistic content instead of try to protect it behind paywalls?
Well, we're trying to do some things, like we're selling different stuff to our readers, not only newspapers, sometimes different...
And this is things like, what, a holiday club or a wine club or gardening?
We actually launched Wine Club. So we do things like that, of course. And as far as I know, Swedish people are really, they're newspaper junkies. They read a lot. How many titles average Swedish reader buys a day? I think
you have 1.7 newspapers that you read per day. And if you look at Aftonbladet on their online edition, they have 3 million daily viewers out of 10 million inhabitants in Sweden. So they're 30% of the market, as said, on a day basis visiting the website. But I don't think we're more news junkies than in most Nordic countries in a way.
Yeah, Nordic countries are really special. I mean, Norwegian people, I don't remember exactly, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're buying 3 dailies a day on average? 1.8, I think it's 2. Okay, not 3, maybe 2. But it's a lot. In Poland, we would be happy if, average person but I would say one title a day.
Simon,
would be
clubs,
quite an accomplishment.
the idea of clubs, is that something the Guardian's looking at?
In terms of readers' clubs, we have, we've had kind of like think session. We talked about that, about having, a kind of a club who, this actually came up. We had a readers' day last year where readers come in, they suggest ideas. And readers said, I would pay a subscription to the Guardian, or to join a club, a kind of a Guardian readers' club, to find something, and think how ProPublica works. It's all from voluntary, it's from voluntary money, it's donations and news organisations funding them and so on. So maybe that is a future, that you have to make people feel they have a stake in what you do, and that's the key thing. That you talked about trust earlier, and yes, they trust you, but they care about whether you print or not, and that's the thing. In the past, maybe people haven't cared so much, and now you want those people who really care to be involved with you and help protect you from the market.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Time for last question, madam.
What we have talked about also applies to the free newspapers that spreading all over the world, right?
Yeah.
It's not only the paid newspapers.
I know, it's not that long ago we paid for the Evening Standard in London for Time Out, and now they're being. I got a copy of Time Out this morning. Didn't feel any different. Felt a bit thinner. Yeah, it used to.
Well, the Evening Standard has been a great example of old models being made to work very successfully. So that was a paid-for paper, very, very badly distributed in London until a few years back. And the new editor came in, used the tube system as a brilliant way of delivering the paper to all the different parts of London, slashed their distribution costs, and has now made it profitable. I think it's a very, very successful model.
And look who's done it.
Yeah.
But
traditionally, we've talked a lot about newspapers today, almost more than websites. But I think, traditionally, newspapers always made more money from their advertising than their readership. Apart from the big sellers like the Sun, which would make all their money from people buying it. But that's been the traditional model, and that's what has changed now, which is the kind of time that we find ourselves in, where it's flipped over. And so, like I said earlier, the Guardian has revenue from its paper, much more than we do from the website at the moment.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're done, and our next guest is waiting in the wings. So I hope that has left you feeling excited and optimistic about the possibilities rather than nervous about the threat. Thank you very much to our panelists, Laura, who's left us, Simon and Vadim. Thank you.
Thank you.